Good morning, all. I'm Etioni Aldarondo, Director of the Melissa Institute for Violence Prevention and Treatment. It's a pleasure for me to have you all join us today for this special event. Many of you have been in some of our previous trainings. Mary Gordon is joining us today as part of our series on innovations on family, on violence prevention series. An effort really to bring into our region and our friends and supporters the best practices, the best knowledge to prevent violence in our lives, in the life of the people that we care about. Today, for those of you who don't know much about the Institute, let me just tell you that we're in our 25th year right now. This is our 25th anniversary year. And throughout this time, our mission has been very simple: to educate and to activate all sectors of society to become agents of violence prevention. And we do it primarily through educational training and activities like the one that you're going to participate today. And we cannot be happier to have Mary with us. As you have probably seen in some of the documents that we sent, everything that the Institute does is free of charge. And we are most grateful for any of you donating, but above all, we're grateful for your involvement and participation in helping us create a better world. Today, we have the outstanding, incredible pleasure to be the host for Mary Gordon. You have more information about her. They say it below, or in the information about her bio. But she's an award-winning social entrepreneur, educator, author, parenting expert, and child advocate who created an internationally recognized program called Root of Empathy. The Root of Empathy program impact has been proven by independent research on 3 continents to reduce aggression and bullying in childhood, increase children's pro-social behavior, with the impact lasting over time. Mary is a consultant, speaks internationally with organizations like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and has among the many conversations, and that's one of her best skills, is to have wonderful conversations. She has had the opportunity to have dialogues with the Dalai Lama. She has been awarded the highest honors in her country, which is Canada, the Order of Canada, and is the recipient of a number of honorary doctorates. Leave you now with Mary.
Thank you, Etioni, for the welcoming introduction. And I'm really thrilled to be here with your organization. The Melissa Institute really is near and dear to the heart of the Roots of Empathy mission. And we're both connected with trying to break generational cycles of violence. And that's what Roots of Empathy is all about. But my presentation today is really not so much about roots of empathy, but the roots of violence and what we can do about it. And normally in Canada, when we start a presentation, we start with honoring the Indigenous ancestry of the lands on which we stand. And this is not a Canadian presentation. This is a presentation to all of the people who are here with us, I think about 170, who come from different places in the world, not just North America. So I would like to rather reference our whole shared world when I ground my opening comments. So what is happening in the world? Well, we are all experiencing a pandemic. So that unites us in our common shared anxiety and insecurities about the future. But also we see hope. We see the landing of the Perseverance NASA spacecraft on Mars. Now, one might think, is this not ridiculous that we're looking for ancient life on Mars and we can't even manage our own life? We're killing one another from violence. You think about Jules Verne, he plumbed the depths of the ocean. And now we're going into the stratosphere to try and understand the whole experience of life. I think today we are very much aware that the pandemic in the world has drawn the curtain on injustices, that domestic violence and child abuse have been laid bare. We know that, for example, in Canada, there has been a 50% increase as measured by a hospital in Ottawa with maltreatment of babies 1 year and under, 50%. We know that domestic violence rates have gone through the roof. So I think suicide and drug addictions are symptomatic of the world that we are living in today, that we are all sharing. It's not just one isolated group, it's all of us. And I think this discussion today about the role of empathy and violence is a really relevant conversation. And it's one I come to with 25 years background with Roots of Empathy, which we, as the get-go, we're trying to break intergenerational cycles of violence. And by raising levels of empathy in children and adults. But as you heard at Tioni and the Melissa Institute, also 25 years. But I'm very long in the tooth. I have other years ahead of that, where I worked with families who were experiencing violence of all kinds. And I do want to say that in all of that violence and pain, I never met a monster. I did meet people who had shaken their babies to death. I did meet people who had pulverized their intimate partner, but I never met anyone who I thought was a monster. I met a lot of people who had an absence of empathy in their lives. And that's why I dedicate my life and our organization to building empathy as an antidote to violence. And I want to open our discussion with a 1-minute video clip from a documentary made by a brilliant man, Alex Gabay, out of the UK. And he decided to make a film on empathy. This is going back to, I think, 2012, that would uncover from various perspectives the genesis of empathy and empathy as a solution, a possible solution to the idea of how do we handle aggression and how do we deal with subjugation of peoples? How do we deal with genocides? How do we deal with wars? And in this film, there's a perspective of neuroscientists, research from neuroscientists, from education, from psychology, from technology even. People like Dr. Simon Baron-Cohen, Franz de Waal, people who are big names in this film. And interestingly, Alex Gabay wanted to start with Roots of Empathy with a basic definition of what empathy is and what is one way that we can develop empathy. I believe, and now I'm not alone, but I was kind of a lone voice in the beginning, that we are all innately predisposed to be empathic. But it is in the loving relationship of the parents and baby, or whomever takes care of that child in the early months and years, that is where empathy either blooms or fades. And the whole point of the Roots of Empathy program that I'll tell you a little bit about in a while is that birth should not be destiny. And if a child didn't land lucky into a nurturing, empathic parenting experience, that we can do something about it. So I'd like to start, Yvonne, if you wouldn't mind queuing up just 1 minute of perspectives from regular Joe people about what they think about empathy.
It's in a certain type of person, I think, to feel it. You either do or you don't.
I work with teenagers, and I think they struggle with that.
People express it in different ways.
It is an instinct. I can't really describe it. It's just this thing inside us that pops up every now and then.
Sometimes I think it's educated out of us.
Does religion have any impact on it, or is it just human nature?
in terms of power, it's seen as a weakness. But I think that's what's maybe wrong with the world today.
Empathy is the ability to be one with the feelings of another. Whereas sympathy to me is really feeling sorry for somebody.
It's a basic level of connectedness.
How do we ever know what someone else is thinking or feeling, since somebody else's mind is unobservable?
Well, neuroscience have been able to answer a very ancient, old and traditional question about empathy, whether empathy is an emotional or a cognitive process.
Empathy.
So there's Franz de Waal, one of the original proponents of the importance of empathy in the world. So I thought it was very interesting that the woman with the pink hair in that short on the street interview, she said empathy could be seen as a weakness. And unfortunately, that was very much the case when I first started talking about empathy. People said things to me like, oh, don't embarrass yourself, Mary. Next thing you'll be talking about love. Well, I speak unabashedly about love, and I speak courageously about empathy. It is a dialogue that we must have. It is the capacity that we have in us that allows us to connect to the others. And we are living in a disjointed, disconnected world where people are killing themselves for lack of connection, for loneliness, for not being recognized. And I think it's not just violence that empathy is a secret sauce to unraveling. It's also happiness. It's also our ability to be constructive in the world, to make a contribution. So Yvonne, if you could please set up the PowerPoint. Well, this is who we are. We're building empathy, the missing piece in violence prevention. So let's have the next slide. The learning objectives, and I hope to be able to meet these for you folks, and I do welcome your questions. So what is the relationship between empathy and violence and aggression? Second learning objective, looking at the executive function skills and self-regulation, combined with our knowledge of child development to be able to increase children's social emotional competence and pro-social behaviors in the world. And the third learning objective, implementing strategies to nurture empathy and help families develop skills to interpret a child's behavioral behavior through the lens of temperament and to be able to intervene. And here's where we might have a bit of fun with temperament. And that will be the last piece of the thing. So let's now talk about the various ways that people think about empathy. Traditionally, there are two forms. There's cognitive empathy, and this is simply perspective taking. And it is a cognitive process. And it is something that we do much better than affective empathy in the world. And most people think of empathy only in the cognitive domain, but that's kind of a dangerous position because you can have cognitive empathy and still be a sociopath. You can be destructive if you just have cognitive empathy. Whereas if you have affective empathy, which is really about being literate with your emotions, being able to feel with the other, that is the humanity aspect, the ethic of care, which makes the difference. So in Roots of Empathy, our approach is that empathy includes both cognitive and affective empathy. And it's easy to manage measure cognitive empathy, bit trickier to measure affective empathy, but that's where you see real change. So let's go to the video, Yvonne. And while I set this video up for you, it's a 1-minute video, but I want to be able to show you sort of the theory of change in Roots of Empathy, how we develop empathy, and the why is we want to break cycles of violence, but how do we do it? So we start off with the attachment relationship between an infant and a parent, because that's where we feel empathy flowers or fades. And we know that empathy cannot be taught in traditional ways in schools. And if you want to change the future of a nation or the world, and right now, Roots of Empathy is on 4 continents, we're not giving up, we're revving up. We feel that more than ever, it's important that we see children as the future, 100% of the future, because we can't control for politics at the minute, anywhere in the world, but our education system is an unparalleled culturation process. And what is the purpose of education? And it varies in different places, but the idea of education being an opportunity to prepare the next generation for civic behavior, for responsible behavior, for responsive parenting. Would that not be a gorgeous goal? That we look at the children in front of us in the classrooms, because they are our social capital. They're not just our economic capital. And unfortunately, a lot of education is seen as job training. And to miss the affective side of empathy and to miss the emotional development of children is nothing short of a crime. So I want to show you how in the Roots of Empathy program, this little baby and the baby's mommy, there's the attachment relationship. This is a group of 10-year-old children downtown Toronto. This little baby May is now 10 years old. Not much has changed in how we do Roots of Empathy, a lot more research, but it's confirming the basic relationships. It's confirming you can't take it down to a simpler denomination. It's person to person. And we now know through neuroscience that empathy really is intersubjectivity. So here's little baby May. Okay, go ahead, Yvonne.
How are you today? Hello, baby May, and how are you? How are you? How are you? Hello, baby May, and how are you? How are you today? Yes, let's see if she keeps trying. Does anybody remember when she was learning to roll over? What? She kept trying? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Does that get her? You okay? We'll see you soon. See you soon. See you soon. Goodbye, baby May. We'll see you soon. See you very soon. Goodbye, baby May. We'll see you soon. See you soon. See you soon.
So there's little baby May. And you probably will notice in the early part of the clip, which was about, I think, probably 3 months before the latter part of the clip, baby May didn't smile once. Baby May has a very serious temperament. And we'll talk about temperament traits later. It doesn't mean she's unhappy. It means she's very serious and takes life earnestly. And she had a goal there, and she was absolutely persevering in that goal. She wanted to reach the toy. And you could see the children around her were so in tune with her intention. They were able to cognitively take her perspective. But you could see also how those children had affective empathy. When baby May bumped her chin, one little boy went, oh, like that. He even demonstrated, which is somatic empathy, another way of demonstrating empathy, just like you might cry if someone you love is crying. So the idea that children are cultivating affective empathy, you could hear from the Roots of Empathy instructor, she was asking the children, what they thought baby May was thinking and what she would do. Yes, will she keep on trying? Because perseverance is one of the biggest challenges classroom teachers have. And I have to say, classroom teachers are our heroes in Roots of Empathy. They are frontline workers right now, and they don't teach Roots of Empathy. We bring in somebody else so they can see their children. The mommy and baby in this case are Japanese. And you might have noticed in the second part of the sequence where they were singing Goodbye, Baby May. And there's no accident that we sing. Singing together builds solidarity in the classroom and connects us one to the other and is very connected to the building of empathy. But baby May was touching all the children. And touch is one of the things we are so missing right now during this pandemic. There's a poverty of touch, and it has mental health consequences. And the children are really missing it. So this was before the pandemic, as I was saying, it's about 9 years ago. But another part, in the first part of that little sequence, which was only 1 minute and 20 seconds, you could see baby May looking deeply into the eyes of the children. So the way a baby looks into your soul is really an amazing thing. And even the youngest child appreciates that and is moved and connected to baby May. And you know, when we think about violence prevention, we are right now launching an anti-bullying week. And one of the things we're saying to the students is that, and it's called Pink Shirt Day, the children understand that the baby is vulnerable and the baby has feelings, just like everybody has feelings in the world, whether you're 9 months old or 90, we share the same feelings. It's what makes us human. So we say to the little children in the desks, you wouldn't hurt your Roots of Empathy baby. Oh no. But what about if your Roots of Empathy baby grows up and goes to school and someone is mean to the baby and they're shocked? How could anyone be mean to our Roots of Empathy baby? And we say, well, are we not all just bigger babies? So why would we hurt someone? So this empathy is a break against hurting people, not a guarantee, but it's a break. So the other thing that little clip showed was the attachment relationship and the power of that attachment relationship. The instructor said to the children, I didn't play the whole video for you, but said to the children, when baby May fell down and hurt her chin, she turned around to her mommy. Why do you think she did that? And there was a little boy in that class who was new to Canada and new to English, but he had such trust that no one would laugh at him with his developing English that he spoke out, and that's courage. And that's what happens in Roots of Empathy classrooms, that children have trust because they understand how you'd feel, that they wouldn't hurt your feelings. So he didn't have the right pronoun. It was a she, but he said, he asked his mommy, am I okay? And for those of you who understand, have been introduced to secure attachment discussions. A secure attachment is a place where a baby with faith will turn to the main caregiver for help. And that's what baby May did. And the mother interpreted the situation for her by patting her chin and patting her on the head. In other words, reassuring her, you're okay, I'm here. So then the instructor said, so why do you think that, what do you think baby May's mother said to her? And of course, not a word was spoken. And this same little boy who was new to English, he said, baby May's mother said, you're good to go. So this idea of unspoken words is where empathy develops. And it is something that we need every child to understand, that we all share the same feelings and we have the capacity to include the other in our thoughts and to include the other in our behavior. So here's the next slide. Affective empathy and cognitive empathy are positively related. So when one goes up, the other tends to go up. One goes down, the other tends to go down. So it's something for us to think about. It's Castro Sanchez's work. And all of these slides, folks, will be available for you. So don't waste your energy writing anything down. I'm happy to share them all with you. I can't see you right at the minute, but I'd like to be able to connect with you. Next slide, please, Yvonne. Okay, empathy and aggression and violence. Well, in Roots of Empathy, we have a lot of research from 3 continents showing the relationship between the reduction of aggression and violence in the Roots of Empathy program. Because when empathy goes up, those other 2 desperate situations go down. And I think the idea of understanding that empathy is a protective factor, that if we want to just look at the absence of empathy downstream and deal with violence, we will never be able to clean up the mess. We will never have the resources to clean up the mess. And if we're looking at education, we need to educate not just the mind, but the heart. And the idea that children could be exposed to developing empathy right during their regular classes, because everything that happens in the Roots of Empathy class has to be developmentally related to the age of the children in the classroom and also to the learning outcomes. And I'm an old school mom, and I'm very aware and respectful of the teachers and their responsibility to deliver on the curriculum. And it's interesting now in the pandemic, we've developed an online curriculum, a recovery curriculum, and it's really about mental health and well-being. And it's also about social justice, because more than ever, we have to look out for one another and make sure that all of society's concerns and worries and investments are not downstream about the impact of violence, but are upstream, where we're preventing violence by allowing empathy to thrive. So next slide, please, Yvonne. So here we have, again, the studies that you can check out that are related to reducing aggression and violence. And the idea that we can really reference studies in different parts of the world and find the same things. And that, that initial documentary that I shared a little clip of, the full documentary deals with people who were survivors of the Holocaust. And it's interesting in the trials, the Nuremberg trials, because which dealt with the war crimes, crimes against humanity. One of the things that I thought was most poignant was they said that the Holocaust was the biggest assault, the biggest war crime of all time, and that the thing that was collectively missing in all the war criminals that were being on trial at Nuremberg was a profound absence of empathy. So also there were people in Gabé's film, Love, Hate, and Everything in Between. I'm not sure that I told you the title of it, but there were people who were survivors of genocides. And we still have genocides going on in the world. And there were people who responded to disasters. And I think that the people who forgive and the people who help, what makes one person forgive and another not? What makes one person race into a burning home and try to help and another person pass by? What makes one person see someone in trouble and help and another person not? And I think it's the ability to see the humanity in the other. And that's empathy. And we need that. We need that for civilization anywhere. And in that film, they were talking about the need for empathy in order to stop wars. And I remember way back when there was a period of heavy fighting in Israel and Palestine. And someone said to me, if only there was empathy at the table, if only they could connect to one another empathically, all the other conversations would fall in line. But to be able to find our shared humanity is one of the tasks, I think, of this century, because we are finding incredible solutions to all kinds of issues. The research that's going into cancer, the research that's going into the aging brain, the research that's going into the technology. You know, Elon Musk parking a car in space. Give me patience. What kind of money went into parking a car in space? What about parking empathy in our hearts? What about infusing higher doses of empathy in society so that we could all care about all the problems? So, next slide, please, Yvonne. Here are some citations. As I said, you can have this this whole PowerPoint, so you don't need to write them down. And the next one, please. Okay, the second, maybe before I go to the second learning outcomes that you're interested in, if I could ask Amanda if there are any questions, I would be happy at this point to respond. And let me say, Amanda, I also am interested in people's comments. If they have comments, that's fine. It doesn't have to be a question.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm just going to, a comment just came in that said, I agree with everything and I do believe that empathy is necessary.
Yay.
A question came in, and I will say it was a little bit before something that you've actually already addressed, but I'm going to put out the question anyway. How do we teach empathy to those families where empathy is not taught or experienced as a family or individual within the family?
Yes, well, that's a cycle we want to break. And it's a difficult thing because adults have to be motivated to change. In terms of little children in school, we are not, it's a universal approach we take with Roots of Empathy. We do not identify the child who's lacking empathy or who's aggressive or violent. We deliver the program to a whole class full. And it's not a full answer to your question because for the parents, there are other solutions. But for children, we do know that there's a huge knock-on effect from empathy. When you develop empathy in childhood, the knock-on effect is on other children in the school where the empathy program is, in the playground, in the community, and particularly in the family. So I think we have found the secret sauce for developing empathy in children joyfully, not medicinally, not as a catch-up, not as a fix-up, but as a preparation for humankind. So there are other programs for parents to improve their empathy. And there's not a whole lot of success, I can tell you. We need to find, I think, almost ways for families to live residentially and to spend weeks together where they don't have to worry about all of the other things in their lives which distract them and just put them into despair. So there's my response for half of your question, maybe.
What are your thoughts on empathy and people refusing to wear masks during the pandemic?
Oh my God, yes. Thank you for that one.
Empathy questions.
It is an absence of empathy. It's I'm taking care of me and to hell with the rest of ye. And that is a very obvious failure of a person to be able to understand the impact of what they're doing. Now, I wouldn't automatically conclude that the person doesn't have empathy. Always we have to give people permission really to think maybe they haven't thought this through. Maybe they haven't realized that if they don't wear a mask, that they are impacting others, because it's not always a given that people understand. But yes, I think it's an attitude, and the people who come together, we are seeing a real proliferation of polarization of people around the globe. Fundamentalism and pluralism is at risk. We're trying to create a world where we all care together, but there are poles developing, and it is a problem. So I say put a stake in the ground and start where you can, do what you know works, but keep looking.
Someone said, can you speak about the relationship between empathy and compassion?
Sure. I think you have to have empathy in order to show compassion. And in the film, I discuss the difference between sympathy and empathy. Empathy is an umbrella concept. Empathy means being able to feel the feelings of the other, all of them. And compassion is about identifying and feeling with the suffering of another. Empathy could be about skipping down the street because you are so happy that you saw someone else skipping down the street. Empathy could be that you are crying with excitement with a friend who just had something very happy happen in their lives. Empathy covers the span of the human experience. It's not just connecting to suffering and acting on that. But without empathy, you don't connect to the suffering. So there's a lot of research done on that. And the Dalai Lama and I don't see eye to eye on that, and we agree to disagree, because he sees empathy, and he's such an expert. He sees empathy and compassion as the same. And I see compassion as something that is possible if you have empathy, but empathy is a broader umbrella. So here's a look at executive function. And as an old school teacher way back when, in my university preparation, we didn't study executive function. And to this day, a great deal of teacher preparation is helping teachers know how to teach subjects. There is some consideration of human development. What is the ability of children of different ages? What are their cognitive capacities? When are there big spurts of language development? And there is certainly some attention paid to children's behavior and how you can respond to it. It's more from a controlling position. Now I'm pleased to see that given all of Vince Valletti's incredible ACEs study, which took place over 20 years, talk about taking us time to get around to things. We are now informed in education, and certainly in child welfare and social services, about the impact of adversity in childhood, and the ACEs, the approach to education that would consider the deleterious impact of toxic stress on children, and understanding why families might be in disarray because of the generational impact of cumulative adversity. But in teacher preparation, and as I said to you before, teachers are our heroes in society. They have a chance to have an impact where society may fail. Sometimes a teacher is a child's very anchor in life. The person, when there's adversity at home and trouble and violence, the teacher may be the only one who really sees the child during that day and says, "How are you?" and means it. So, but also in teacher training, there's not a whole lot of importance put on executive function skills in the regular teaching of the day. Now, sometimes very good teaching automatically takes in executive function skills, but in Roots of Empathy, we intentionally build in executive function skills. These are a series of capacities. There are cognitive capacities that are really important in helping a child learn how to navigate their way through life, so that when they're 15 years old and they get in a car with a friend who's had too much to drink, they have the capacity to make a good decision. Because you don't get that capacity when you're 15. You start getting that capacity at 5 months. That capacity and all of these executive function skills start developing in infancy through loving relationships and continue throughout the lifespan through caring, responsive relationships, through modeling. You have to be able to see it to get it. You have to be able to have someone be in dialogue with you to be able to address many of these things. So just quickly, let's look at them. Focusing attention. Well, in Roots of Empathy, you saw the baby looking at the children. We start and finish every family visit with the baby being presented to every child in the class so that they can see that baby, take in that baby, and to be seen by a baby is to have your soul exposed. And they touch the baby's feet. So you have the combination of touch and vision. And the big thing is you have that emotional connection that will help you develop affective empathy as you learn to hear how that baby is feeling and then understand your own feelings through that discussion. So focused attention is something we really look at. Classroom teachers who observe and join us in these programs, they say that when they want the children to really focus on a difficult concept they're teaching, they do it immediately after the family visit, because the children are active alert and are sort of tuned in to be focusing on everything about the baby. What do you notice that's different about the baby? And children will say things that even the mother or the father haven't even noticed. They'll say things like, the baby looks at us longer now, and the baby smiles more, and the baby's hair grew in the back. They'll say things, they'll notice things. So this focused attention isn't just about the physical. It's about, how do you think the baby is feeling now? Why do you think the baby is feeling that way? What do you notice about the baby's body? So children learn to read body language. They learn to develop a skill to read the baby's emotion cues. And talk about wearing masks, the question we just had, my golly. Here we have, in helping children read emotion cues, which has everything to do with emotional literacy, which is the affective side of empathy. How can you read those cues when people are wearing masks? So in our recovery program, we have a whole new style of reading what the eyes are telling you, what the body is telling you, to help children. So this focused attention needs our attention. So what about inhibition control? Well, this is the ability for children to resist temptation. And this is the ability to be able to assess where you are and what you want to do about something. And is this something that you can bear not to do? And when a child is well loved, a child has more confidence in their ability to not do something. And we had a wonderful example of this, that it's in an NBC interview, actually, that NBC came from New York to do a filming of a DC Roots of Empathy class. And when they interviewed the Roots of Empathy instructor and the classroom teacher afterwards, the children were gone then, the classroom teacher said, for her, one of the biggest moments in the year was that there was a little boy who basically lived in a very violent home. And his behavior had been super aggressive. And she said her tearful moment was when that little boy said to her privately, I was going to do, and whatever it was he described, I don't remember, but it was something hurtful. And he said, but I remembered, would I do that to baby Max? And she said she knew right then and there that he had inhibition control, because he realized that he wouldn't hurt the baby because he had empathy. He understood how that would feel for the baby. He also made that bridge of empathy to understand that it would hurt his friend. So she felt that his life changed, that he now was in control. So this inhibition control, I think, is super important. Then there's working memory, mental flexibility. I don't want to take too much time on this, but all of these things, being able to act appropriately. You know, children have difficulty in adapting to new and different experiences. And we're going to talk about adaptability when we get to the third learning outcome, about how do we help our children. But there are experiences where we can talk about the experience and give the child the opportunity to say, you know, what kind of voice should I use when we have a school assembly, or when we go to our place of worship? How do we behave differently? Or another part of this is, how do we think differently, and how do we remember different things? And it's what I call, in society, we need to develop synthesizing minds, where we're able to put together the picture of various things. But developing this executive function capacity helps all of that. Phil Salazzo's work, there's a citation there, really helped me, because he is an expert on executive function. And he walked us through how Roots of Empathy develops executive function in everything we do. And I feel that's a quiet favor we do children, and it's a quiet favor we do their world, which is our world of tomorrow. So the next slide, please, Yvonne. So self-reg is really married up with executive function. And together, I think they help children handle multiple tasks. And there are, I wouldn't say critical periods of development, because we've all been wounded by that theory back in the 2000s about critical period of brain development and the window of opportunity slamming shut. Thank God that has tailed off, but there are periods of accelerated, is the way I like to put it, development. And we know this starts in infancy, but the 3 to 5 year old period, which is where we introduce our Seeds of Empathy program, and it's no accident. Seeds of Empathy is a program with pretty well the same mission as Roots of Empathy, but the children are very different little people at that stage. And we offer the program in their early childhood settings, childcare. And when we're coming to bring Roots of Empathy, which we're so delighted to be working with Etione and the Melissa Institute to introduce Roots of Empathy next year to classrooms in Miami. The following year, we're hoping to introduce Seeds of Empathy to 3 to 5 year olds in Miami. And my inspiration there is the children's movement and Dave Lawrence and the amazing work they've done on the early years, and moving society along to understand the importance of these years and what we can do to enhance personal happiness of children and families and society, as well as optimal development in those early years. So my hat's off to Dave Lawrence and to overall Miami and how you're dealing with this. So next slide before I get carried away there. Okay, so here we have the third learning objective, really. And before we go on to that, let me just pause and ask Amanda what comments or questions people might have.
Hi, Mary. My colleague and I are thoroughly enjoying your talk from the UK. Other than secure attachment, are there other important sources for empathy development in childhood and adolescence?
Thank you for that question. Yes, is the answer. There's all kinds of others. It's never one thing in life, but it's the most important thing. And, you know, not everybody can land lucky in a happy, well-adjusted family where people welcome the baby. That's not reality. So what I can say is that children in their lives are interfacing with many people. And in all my work around child abuse and domestic violence, I found that it just took one person to make the difference in a child's life. Now, ideally, it would be a parent, but it wasn't game over if it wasn't. Sometimes it would be someone who was working at a community center. Sometimes it would be a social worker, and what an incredible pressure on poor social workers. Sometimes it would be a guidance officer, sometimes a librarian, very often school and community centered. Can you imagine one time it was a bus driver? Oh my God, I love that bus driver. Can you imagine being such an influence on a whole busload of children every day that you see a child and you greet them by name? So you develop empathy when you experience empathy. So for someone to see you and say, "Good morning, Jeanette, and how are you today?" And to know that Jeanette can sit right behind you and you can chat all the way to school. And on the way back, no, you can't sit there, that's Jeanette's seat. And Jeanette can unpack her day with an empathic bus driver who will encourage her. Number one, listen to her and hear her. And in Roots of Empathy, we talk about deep listening. Deep listening means you listen without judgment or criticism, that you listen with your heart, that your emotions are open and responsive, not just hearing cognitively, but hearing with your body as well. And the hope where families sometimes fail us, and we never blame or shame a family. Everybody does the best job they can with the deal they've been given, and we're trying to break those cycles. But one way you break the cycle is you allow the child to fly, and the child can find those human connections in many people. And that's why I say it takes a village. We need everybody to be able to help. I love that we hear dogs in the background, by the way. I haven't heard any babies yet, but dogs are good. But the other sources where you can develop empathy, crossing guards. When I used to work with teenage mothers who were 100% sexually abused in their own childhood, can you imagine? So how do you become a competent parent when you didn't experience an empathic childhood? You can overcome it. But I found one of the most supportive people that I found in one community was a crossing guard. And let me put it this way, she was an incontinent crossing guard. So she didn't smell good. This woman exuded empathy. This woman, many people were critical of her because of her physical challenge. And you're on a crossing walk, you can't always make a washroom. This is a very human story, as is empathy. But this crossing guard, she walked across the street with everybody. She had no teeth on the bottom. She was a very poor woman, but she was a very rich person. So she connected with every child she walked across the street. She connected with me. When I was doing outreach, this is 100 years ago, when I was doing outreach to find the teenage moms to bring them to my group, I didn't have posters. I didn't use business cards. I did pick up volleyball. I did greasy spoons. I did crosswalks. Who knows the people? Who are the three people who will get to the teenage mother who doesn't trust anyone for very good reasons? So I guess the whole idea of how else and who else can help us develop empathy outside of the classroom, we need to look at the community. So we need to do workshops when children are going by bus to camps, all kinds of camps. The youth who are on the buses with those kids might be really good at teaching how to canoe, might be really good at teaching art, might be really good at many, many things. Has anybody ever told them the power of their relationship with the children? And if they talk on the bus about the great lay they had the night before, which I have witnessed, the children hear it. So what I'm saying is, we all have the opportunity to positively impact not just the children, but everybody we see. And when we are empathic and kind, other people feel it. So, to look at who are the groups that we're not reaching. So all those kids in the summertime who run summer camps, they need to have a little bit of training in empathy to understand how children feel, how they see their world, the power of their relationship. One of the things we love hearing back from classroom teachers in Roots of Empathy classrooms is how they look at their relationship with their children differently. They feel more powerful. They realize that it's not just what they say, it's how they say it. It's not just like looking professional, it's like looking human and approachable. And we see so many videos these days of amazing teachers. My very favorite one is this African American man who greets every child in his class with a particular high five, or just amazing, the power of a teacher to connect with each person. But I think, there's untapped potential for us to reach out through whatever role we play to make a difference, not to judge. I can say that in shopping centers, which none of us are seeing much of these days, in my case, this is great news, not my favorite place, but life happens for teenagers in shopping malls. We don't do a very good job we've got the UK, I'm speaking to the UK, but let me promise you, in North America, we're not much different in that there are very few places that welcome adolescence. And the second period of acceleration of executive function is adolescence. What messages are we giving them? You're not welcome here. Don't hang out. More than two of you is a problem. We're suspicious of you. You're too loud. You're too big. You're clumsy. So I think, I don't understand why everybody who works in a service role, whether you're in the hot dog stand, in a coffee shop, actually, I see a lot of empathy in baristas, to tell you the truth, but wherever you interface with people, there should be an expectation that whoever is giving them the orientation, whether you're a bank teller or in a hospital, that you understand that your relationship with that person has everything to do with the transaction. We have money transactions, but the most important are interactions between people, because that is what makes life go well. So empathy can be developed casually. When someone feels that you feel for them, it changes them. And the research says that any act of kindness has a biologically measured impact on us. We're talking hormones here. We're talking, how do we change our hormonal imbalance? Easy. If we want to feel good, start helping. And I think it's probably the reason some teachers who must come home super, super exhausted, they may not be getting a massive salary, but their bank balance of hugs and appreciation and having an impact on a child's life is incalculable. So I think we all in society have a chance to be agents of change, to demonstrate our empathy to a stranger, to smile. You can't with the mask on, but your eyes can. You can even say something in passing someone. So if you have a deeper question there that I haven't asked my friends in the UK, you can ask it. Was there something in particular you wanted to hear?
We'll let you know if they follow back up. And I'm actually going to read aloud just a comment that came in that said, I think girls 6 to 10 years old need desperately the program of Seeds of Empathy. At this time, parents expect the girls to be so mature. They learn to clean, help in chores, cook, and feelings of empathy are not talked about as much as before. And that Maria works with this age group and just says thank you.
Well, Maria, I send you a hug. This age group, I completely understand. Because I look at 5 as being the senior citizen of early childhood. And then I look at 10 as being the senior citizenship of childhood. And when you're the senior citizen, you're supposed to have everything figured out. So at 5, you suddenly graduate, you're in full day school in many cases, and you're supposed to be grown up. Now you've just learned to cross the street on your own, but you have in both those bookend ages, you have added expectations. Like you've graduated when you're 5, you've graduated from early childhood. It's kind of unfair. Like you're not ready for graduation. So the expectation of a 5-year-old, when you look at the child's body, when you look at the child's emotional development, where I live here in Toronto, children of 5 are in full day school. It's different from being in childcare. And I should just say, what's the name of my friend who just made the comment? Nima? No?
No, Nima is I believe our friend from UK.
Okay.
Give me just one moment. Sorry.
That's okay.
Our friend who just made that comment is Maria Becerra.
Okay, Maria. So I should just say that Seeds of Empathy is just for children 5 and under, 3 to 5. But Roots of Empathy is totally perfect for 5 to 10-year-olds. But I think the stress is on the 5-year-old. When we overstress children, as you're speaking about expectations and not enough empathy, and I agree with you, when we overstress them with expectations, what you see happen is stress reactions. It's just like we're seeing with the pandemic, that children's anxiety has been exhibited in stress behaviors, like many children have reverted to bedwetting, and not just 5-year-olds, but through 10. Many children have started chewing the cuffs of their sweatshirt or chewing the neckband of their sweatshirt. Children have, they have different ways of showing their stress when we overstress them. Sure, the pandemic is stressful, but the pandemic aside, when we have expectations of them without really tuning in to emotionally, how ready are they for this? And the thing is, when you show empathy, as you're suggesting, Maria, what you're saying is that you are reading their cues to understand where they are at this moment. How are they feeling? So that, for example, in the home, if a parent wants an 8-year-old to tidy up their bedroom, the parent probably doesn't understand where the child is right at that moment. And for some children of 8 years old, looking back at executive function skills, if you don't break down that task for them, they might feel overwhelmed and not do anything. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're being belligerent or objectionable or defiant. It might mean they're just overwhelmed. And I think all too often, people who are responsible for children, whether it's, in their childcare center or their teacher, or people in, extracurricular activities or families, we all are busy. And we all have our own goals. Like you have to get this cleaned up and you have to get dinner on the table and then you have to have your bath and then you have to get bed. And by the way, did you do your homework? So there's a lot of when are you going to and how come you didn't? And all of these kinds of expectations on children, and it can be overwhelming. We need to check in and see where they are. So before we start giving our series of expectations and directions, we have to know age appropriate directions. We know that a 3-year-old can handle 2 directions. Please go upstairs and bring down your red cardigan. A 5-year-old can carry 3. A stressed child can carry none. An anxious child can carry none. It's not being defiant. And I think our showing empathy, as you suggested, Maria, to the child, which is, think about it as the ethic of care, emotional empathy or affective empathy, is being able to tune into the other person and feel what they feel. So before we give any announcements or orders and directions, it always pays to check in. How are you doing, buddy? What's up? What happened today? There's a couple of things I need you to help me with. So let's look at what we got to do. If it's at home, let's look at what we've got to do. And you can appreciate parents are overwhelmed, particularly during this period. But even at the best of times, parenting is hugely stressful. You know, there is probably not a more exhausting job than parenting, but it can be exhilarating. And I think it's the most important job under the stars. But it's about 90% exhaustion and 10% exhilaration. So I think a little bit of understanding and empathy all around is helpful. And also for people, your age group of girls, for people to understand developmentally what is typical for that age. And here's the big problem we have in society. As you say, we have accelerated expectations for what children can do. Their dressing, little girls' dressing, has been sexualized. That they have models of behavior on social media and videos and television which are outrageous. Now, it depends what your own values are. I'm speaking strictly from my own value position. But I am also advocating for children because we know that developmentally, children are not developing emotionally any quicker than they ever were. They are developing faster physically. In fact, little girls are experiencing their first menstrual period at an earlier age, and it keeps getting earlier and earlier. And that is a sign of our changing world, not necessarily a good sign of our climate, impacts from climate change. But we do know that children sound very sophisticated because they are sophisticated with technology. You know, I have a little grandchild who I think is more competent in some aspects of technology than I am. But it doesn't mean that just because they have a sophisticated language when speaking about technology, that they have a sophisticated language in speaking about how they feel. Our whole world is pretty well emotionally illiterate. We have a language to speak about the stars. We have a language to speak about many, many things. We do not have a good language to speak about how we feel. And our emotions are our first and universal language. Babies are 100% emotionally literate. They let you know how they feel. Make no mistake, if they're uncomfortable, you're going to hear in major decibels. So with children's expectation and them not getting empathy, it's because very often our expectations are in advance of their emotional capacities or the stress that they're experiencing. And I think, you know, we ask children in Roots of Empathy, and Roots of Empathy, there's a program for kindergarten, for primary school, and then for junior and senior children. Not in high schools because the schedule is crazy. You can't fit in the Roots of Empathy visits. There's 27 visits over the school year. But we ask the children, we ask them to tell us, how does it feel to be 7? If you were to write a letter to the Roots of Empathy baby explaining this is what it's like to be 7, when you get to be 7, this is what it feels like, it would break your heart. Because children do feel pressured and they like to please the people they love. And being a praise junkie is a dangerous thing. It's important to please your parents, but if your entire sense of self depends on shining in the eyes of others, it makes you vulnerable to sexual abuse. So often in Roots of Empathy, and this is related to your question, Maria, In Roots of Empathy, we nurture in children intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is having your own goals and trying to achieve your own goals. It doesn't mean you ignore other people's goals, but extrinsic motivation is in a system, it's really a system of rewards. And it's basically how school works. And it's basically how a lot of society works. There are prizes for the best, the first, the fastest, the smartest, the best speller, the most beautiful. So in life, it's not a fair race. And life for your 6 to 10-year-old girls should not be a race, it should be a feast. And how do we make it a feast? We acknowledge them, we accept them, we respect them, we love them for who they are. And if you think about it, children are fighting to win prizes all the time. And sometimes the prize is for negative attention. So if they don't get our attention legitimately, they will get it illegitimately. And then we have violence down the road, victims and violence. So this whole idea of 6 to 10-year-old girls, if their whole motivation is to be first so that they will be respected and acknowledged, it's a dangerous thing. So when children, having worked so much with sexual abuse, very often little girls who try to please adults because they want to be loved, do dreadful things. Also, they're threatened, but they do dreadful things and ruins their entire life. So this idea of intrinsic motivation and also intrinsic pride, what are you proud of? We want children who are proud not just because of medals and ribbons. That's failing. Being proud of your character, being proud of a decision you made to help someone, being proud that you told the truth when it was painful, being proud that you stood up for someone who was making fun of your friend's skin color. These are examples we hear from children. This is intrinsic pride. And these are two things that our societies in general, I know we've got North America and UK on that call, do not value. We value winners. So I hope, Maria, that helped with your issue, and I appreciate your problem. By the way, there is a lot of Roots of Empathy in the UK. If you go to our website, rootsofempathy.org, you can find who to be in touch with for Roots of Empathy in the UK. You had another comment there, I think.
Well, our friend Nima in the UK did respond and said that you answered the question, and many thanks for the thorough answer and bringing incredible examples to life in doing so.
Okay, good. Thank you.
This question actually says, what about the feeling of being too empathic? Mm-hmm. Is this a matter of affective empathy that needs to be regulated just like any other emotion? Is empathy a function to or a process of cognitive, affective, and somatic aspects that is passive of regulation?
Well, it's really a mental health issue that there are definitely adults and children who suffer from an excess of empathy. And I remember discussing this with a doctor, and it was a very interesting discussion we had because it's Dr. Dan Siegel I'm speaking of. He's a very famous psychiatrist, medical doctor, but has his own practice of mindfulness. And he and I were doing a TED Talk together in Richmond, California. And I asked him about this issue of excessive empathy that's detrimental to the mental health and well-being of an individual. And he said, you know, when you become a doctor, it's because you care. And then you have to give injections or do painful things sometimes, and it breaks your heart. And then there comes a point where you can't function if you're completely motored by empathy. You more or less also have to be motored by the good that is going to come of this. And I thought it was such a common sense and self-empathy response, because for people who are overly empathic, they do suffer and they need self-empathy. And I think particularly if this is a case in childhood, little children who see suffering in the world and are tormented by it, or little children who spend too much time looking after other people to the detriment of their own well-being. And this is a mental health sort of discussion. So I would say, if you're thinking of some person in particular, or the overall is fine, but if it's some person in particular, if it's a child or if it's a friend or a colleague, it's something that they might want to have a discussion with a psychologist or a social worker or somebody who deals with our adjustment to our lives, because it can be harmful, an excessive amount of empathy. It's sometimes called a medical excessive amount of empathy. It's a different issue. I just want to say that in the Roots of Empathy program, which we're so excited to be bringing to Miami, we take almost an indigenous approach to quiet moments, empty spaces, which are deathly on radio, or particularly on radio, they're deathly. And some people find they're deathly in this kind of a situation too. You got to keep talking, keep talking, keep talking. Well, we're talking ourselves to death, Shashi, but we do a lot of over talking, I think. And one of the big values in Roots of Empathy, I mentioned deep listening before, but one of the big values is in our training, which is a 4-day training, we say to people that to really to be still and to listen and to welcome children's whatever the children have to offer is hard to do, because our culture is a talk culture, not a feel culture. And we know that classrooms are think and talk tanks. We want classrooms to be feel tanks as well. And to become a feel tank, you have to listen. And I don't know if you can think of it, there's so many songs that sing about listen. And the big thing about empathy is people feel listened to and understood. But we take the stance that if you're hearing your own voice a lot, it's not a good balance. Just stop. And when we ask children questions, and in Roots of Empathy, we only ask questions. I take a Socratic approach. We don't tell children anything, nothing. They have it, we help them pull out what's inside. So we ask experiential questions, which are authentic, questions to which there's no answer that we know of. Like, not the silly questions like we ask children, what color is this and how many legs does this one have? And everyone knows the answer, so it's insulting. We ask questions like, what do you think? And when was a time? And can you imagine? And those kinds of real questions that they're authentic because we don't know the answer, but they're hugely important because children hear what their friends think and feel. But sometimes if you're a child and no one has ever asked you how you feel about something, no one has ever asked your opinion, that it takes a while to get your mind and your mouth in gear. And we know that little girls are better at, generally speaking, when they're young, at getting their mind and their mouth in gear because they have more experience with talking because of the way we socialize their early play. They're more relationship bound than construction toys, if you will, to simplify it. But we do respect the time that it might take any child to formulate their thinking and to be able to share it. So we have a lot of air between the stones in Roots of Empathy. We give children respectful space and time, and we're not awkward and we don't care. we say, you know what, take your time. We can all just sit and have a little think right along with you. And children become more comfortable about silences. So when they say something, it's authentic and it's genuine and it is listened to. And it allows children to know that I'm not the only one who feels like that. I'm not the only one who's scared of the dark. I'm not the only one who doesn't like to walk home alone. You know, all those kinds of little nervousness, and to make yourself vulnerable in your classroom is what this is all about. Implementing strategies to nurture empathy and help families develop skills to interpret their children's behavior and intervene. And my solution to this particularly is to help families. We've talked about, you know, the two other issues, you know, about, well, I don't want to go back over, but let's just say we're now at the point where I want to share with you temperament traits as a way to understand our children and to support them in behaving as they would like and as you would like. So let's just say that temperament is a concept that was originally addressed by Stella Chess and Alexander Thomas in a study, a longitudinal study they did in the very late 50s, so a long time ago. But it has been taken up by various people. And I started working with the concept of temperament, I'd say about 30 years ago. So the idea is that our temperament, and there are 9 different ways of looking at it, it's a way, a unique way that we see the world. And every child has a unique temperament. And yes, it is a predisposition. So it is delivered along with the baby. And it can change over time. But generally speaking, the predisposition is a constant over the lifespan. So if we look at our children's behavior through the lens of empathy and through the lens of temperament, that is where we're going to go. So let me start with the temperament traits that are on the screen. So the first one is activity level. And all temperament traits, you can think of them as being along a continuum. You can have high activity level or low activity level. And it's not good or bad. This is not a valence we're talking about. This is not a judgment. It's just to understand, you know, does your child have high activity level or low activity level? So if your child has high activity level, and we're helping our children to be able to behave well, and we want to be able to productively and constructively redirect their behavior, here is a great strategy. So if you know your child has very high activity level, I can promise you they're going to have problems in school. Because in school, teachers like to have children in a predictable place so they know where everyone is and they can teach them accordingly. A child with a high activity level will find it very difficult to stay seated in their seat. It will be torture. So they will be rocking in the chair. They'll probably fall out of the chair. It's the reason why many teachers put tennis balls on the chairs, because it's less distracting with a child that's rocking. Wise teachers find excuses to have children with high activity level have an opportunity to let it out. This is not a character flaw. High activity level is a blessing in adulthood. It's a curse sometimes in childhood when you're, you know, you might be in your place of worship, you might be in a restaurant, you might be places where it's awkward to have your child up and down and all around, under the chair rather than on it. And these are the people who are constantly tapping on the desk, chewing gum, flipping their pen, because they're finding their own personal strategies that they can't move, so they do that. So just to say that children with low activity level, when we teach them, we teach this in Roots of Empathy, we do it through the lens of the baby. So is our baby high activity level? And for women who've carried a baby, you know, in the womb, if you've got a baby with high activity level, and if you have another one, they may have completely different levels of activity because every child is out of a different basket. But this whole concept of how are we born to see the world and interpret the world is powerful in helping our children feel that they know themselves and can control their own behavior, and ways for helping you. One of the interesting things that comes out of Roots of Empathy, if you have a baby with very low activity level, you put them down on the floor when they're able to sit, and they stay there. You know where you're going to find them. High activity baby, you turn your back and they're scaling the bookcase. So it's more energy. Some people who are very sports minded really enjoy a child with high activity level, and they worry about a child who has low activity level. What is wrong with them? There's nothing wrong with them. They're just not like you. So children in Roots of Empathy are really pleased to learn that if they have low levels of activity, that they're not lazy, that they probably prefer to come home and read a book than go out and play with friends, and there's nothing wrong with them. So this is about removing any shame or blame or guilt about children's various temperament traits. Let me just look at intensity. This is the most, I think, important trait to understand. Children who have low intensity have a very minimal emotional reaction. It takes a lot to get them going. Whereas children with high intensity respond with great drama to anything good or bad that happens to them. So for a child with very high intensity, if they experience disappointment, you're going to hear about it. So if they want something badly, like, can't I have one cookie before dinner? They're going to want it dramatically and with volume. So they can be very annoying. They can be very, very upset and need a lot of comforting. You can tell in infancy, if you've got a high intense baby, they need a lot of comforting. They cry easily. They cry loud. They cry long. They're difficult to soothe. There's nothing wrong with them. They've got high intensity. They will make amazing friends later on. When you go to a film with them, they'll laugh louder than anyone else. They'll enjoy deeply. They'll cry louder than anyone else. They will experience life to the full. They are highly emotional people. On the other end of the spectrum, if you've got a child who's got low intensity, it doesn't mean they're not involved. It doesn't mean they're not happy if they're not hanging from the ceilings. You know, you might say, oh, we're going to go to Disneyland. It's going to be the trip of our lives. And they say, great. Isn't that wonderful? Whereas the other child on a high intensity will be running around the room ecstatic, unable to bridle their excitement. So we are all on that continuum. And you know, life would be pretty dull if we were all the same. So you will have children in the family, you will have parents in the family, you will have teachers, somewhere all along these lines. So then there's sensitivity. That's not just emotional sensitivity. That is sensitivity, physical sensitivity. There are children who will not wear a t-shirt with a tag in it. There are children who will not wear socks with a seam in it because they're very sensitive. There are children who don't want to put on, you know, poor Texas is having all this snow at the minute. There were children who do not want to put on a scarf and gloves. They don't feel the cold in the same way. We want to dress them up and tie them up, but they have a different sensitivity to heat and cold. So in terms of sensitivity, there are some children who can't stand the sensation of jelly. Others love it. Some are highly sensitive, some not. So it's along the whole dimension of physical and emotional sensitivity. Then there's first reaction. I love this one. Some of us have a first reaction of caution. And this is a good thing in life for many people, because these are the children who will think before they act. On the other end of the spectrum, and it's not good or bad, on the end of the continuum is children whose first reaction is adventure. Let's do it. Let's go. Come on. These children are the children who jump into the deep end of the pool without realizing, oh yes, I don't know how to swim, but isn't that water exciting? These are the children who are risk takers. Now, it's grand to have children all the way along the spectrum. And if you've got a child who is a very adventurous child, they will need more Band-Aids and they will need more hugs, because not only will they be adventurous in physical things, they will be the first to get their heart broken because they'll love readily, they'll care readily. So all the way along the spectrum, children need our understanding, and they need to understand who they are. They need to know. My first look at things, my first take at things is always excitement, and I know I have to calm down and settle. Or the child who's very cautious, you hope that they have friends who are more adventurous, because those friends will bring them out. And if you're the parent of a child whose first reaction is adventure, you really hope they have some cautious friends. And that's what life is in the classroom, in the family, because the parents also are somewhere along these things. And in terms of helping our children, where we stand, and we do a lot of workshops on this for parents in Roots of Empathy and in Seeds of Empathy too, how we are as a parent to understand our own place on the continuum has everything to do with how we match up with our different children, because our different children have a whole array of positions on all these temperament traits. Okay, so let's look at adaptability. Well, here we are in a pandemic. How have we adapted? How have we transitioned? How have we pivoted? We've got a whole new vocabulary to describe adaptability, really. So a child who's highly adaptable makes transitions easily. This is a child you can say, oh, we're going to be sleeping over, if you live in Texas, at so-and-so's house because they have the ability to cook on their stove and we don't. So you're going to be sleeping over there. The child who has very low adaptability is immediately thinking, oh no, where am I going to sleep? I might not like the smell of their house. I haven't done this before. It's a new experience for me. I don't know if I'll be able to fall asleep in that room. Maybe they're not going to let me keep on the light. I like things to be the same. This is going to be a bad experience. Whereas the child who's highly adaptable is going to be able to mold into, whatever. This is the child who really deals with life in a very positive and constructive way. It doesn't mean the child with low adaptability isn't constructive. It means they're going to have a hard time. It means it will take our empathy in understanding that one of your children is going to need you to hover by, and you're going to need to explain, you usually don't warm up to new experiences. This is a new experience, but you know what? Here's probably what's going to happen, and we can talk about it as it goes. And probably after a couple of hours, you'll be happy with everything. But if you're not, you can tell me. So it's this kind of empathy and being able to read our child and understand where they are, and to say, I'm just like you. I don't like new experiences. I definitely don't like surprise parties. I like to know what's coming, and I like things to be the same. It's why I like to go to the same restaurant all the time. I don't like adapting to new food and making decisions about it. Children so appreciate being understood. It's another way we love them. And this concept of temperament is a great way to do it. So mood. So when I showed you the clip of the Roots of Empathy class, little baby May, in that first clip, I think baby May was probably about 5 months old. She was in her mom's arms, and when going around singing to say hello to the children, she was very serious. She didn't touch any of them. She didn't smile once. And in fact, in that whole sequence, she never cracked a smile. But her mood was serious. And that was her first way. And it was her way until she was with us for about 6-7 months. And I call these children philosopher kings because they're thinking about things. It doesn't mean they're unhappy. Their demeanor is more serious. And sometimes people mistake them for being unhappy or not being responsive. And that's unfair, because adults expect children to make them feel good. Adults expect children to respond to them and smile at them so the adult feels good. Well, get a grip. It's not about the adult feeling good. It's about respecting how this child chooses to engage with you. And if the child is more serious, give them a break. Respect that. Allow them to warm up. And they might not warm up, but you can see how Baby May did warm up to these children. This was one of her last visits, that second part, where she was touching the children and she was smiling to beat the band. She was also bowing. And the reason she was bowing, as her mother shared, that when her mother was a little girl in Japan, every time her mother, Baby May's grandma, fed her, she bowed to her. What a beautiful, beautiful idea. Anyway, so she said she'd lost most of her Japanese traditions, but the one thing she kept in honor of her mother was that every time she fed Baby May, she bowed to her. So Baby May, out of respect and love, was bowing to the children. How incredible. I mean, Baby May couldn't speak a word at this time, but look at the volume of learning and transmission of culture and love and empathy. So, so mood can change over time because we make it change. Adaptability, yes, we make ourselves. I mean, can you imagine that you're a person with low adaptability and you have to be a traveling salesman? You take your own pillow on the plane. I've seen it. You make ways to make yourself feel comfortable. So, birth isn't destiny. So persistence. Baby May demonstrated exquisite persistence in trying to reach that toy. That classroom teacher who watched that kept using that example. Remember when Baby May kept trying to reach that toy and she fell over twice, and the second time she bumped her chin? She didn't give up. She persisted. There are varying levels of persistence. And if you have a child or you yourself are low on persistence, it dogs you. It frustrates you. It makes you sometimes procrastinate. You need to encourage yourself to finish tasks, to break it down and to do it. Whereas if you're very high on persistence, you can be a bit of a pain because you're like a dog with a bone. You won't give up till you get something done. It's like cutting out a pattern for a dress that you want to make, and you stay up all night to make that dress because you really want to get it done. It's not practical, but it is an example of sort of positive perseverance, which may annoy others. But high perseverance allows kids to push through and get things done. Ideally, you're not on either end of the spectrum. But to understand a child who's highly persistent, very often they're accused of nagging because they want something so much, they'll keep you in tow on it. So it's not good, it's not bad. The thing is, we need to recognize it and help the child that we've got to live in the world that is, or the classroom that is. Teachers really appreciate understanding this lens and love the workshop on this. So then you have distractibility. Well, Baby May was not easily distracted. She had low distractibility, and that's how easily do we give up, is more the persistence one, and the distractibility. So just to go back to persistence, it's about frustration level and how easily do we give up on things. So it's not a character flaw, but it is a really good temperament trait to get the handle of. So now moving back again to distractibility. Some children, they're very often called attention, I hate the phrase, ADHD, that their attention is easily taken away from the task at hand. And when you're a school child, that's a problem because a teacher says you're not paying attention. It's not that you're not paying attention. You're paying attention to too many things. You're interested by many things. A bird goes by the classroom window and the child is taken away. How beautiful is that? From what you're saying. It's frustrating for the teacher. It's not optimal, but what we sometimes miss is that the child who's highly distractible very often has taken in a whole range of very interesting things and knows facts and can tell you about a picture that was on a wall in a home that you visited that nobody else noticed, or can be distracted that the teacher is wearing new earrings, and where did they come from, and do they mean something special, so that everything else is over the head for the moment because they've been distracted. These people often are very interesting people, but the trick is, how do you help them learn to not be so distractible, because it's important to focus your attention. There you go again, another executive function skill. It's important to focus your attention to be able to achieve well. So then the last one is rhythmicity. And this is about body rhythm. And this is one that, I mean, it's really helpful if people understood this, because you're born with this. It doesn't change over time. You just learn to live with it. If you have high rhythmicity, it means all of your body functions are fairly predictable. It means that if you have a baby with high rhythmicity, you think you're a brilliant parent. Why? Because routines work well, that the baby sleeps in sequences, that the baby's body is responsive and predictable, that you can have hot coffee, that helping the child develop toilet practices, piece of cake, very predictable, everything very predictable. They're hungry on time. If you have a child who has very low rhythmicity, you might prepare a wonderful breakfast for them to go to school, and they're not hungry then, but they're going to be ravenous in an hour. So rather than criticize that child, give them a snack to take to school, rather than blaming them. You know, it's a sort of thing that before you go on a road trip, every parent says to the child, anyone want to go to the bathroom? Last chance to go to the bathroom. Well, there's always going to be one child 10 minutes later who says, but I didn't need to go before. And this is part of rhythmicity. It has everything to do with our sleep patterns. It has everything to do with our hunger. It has everything to do with predictability. And if you have a child with high rhythmicity, you feel very successful because of the routines, as I was mentioning. But in adulthood, sometimes it can be a nuisance. Because life isn't always organized, that, you know, you need to sleep at 10 o'clock. Well, I'm sorry, but the party goes on till 1. So it's just not to judge, not to create a profile for a child that is damning, but to open our eyes and our hearts to how they face life and to help them understand. So let me stop here, Amanda. I want folks to be able to take this and place themselves another time on the continuum. And then you might want to put someone in your life on the same continuum to see how compatible you are, because sometimes being the same can repel, and sometimes being the same can bring you together. All of it will help you understand behavior, though. So Amanda, what questions have we got?
I love what you just said about putting people we know on there, because I was doing that while you were talking. All right, so we got a question from our research director, Dr. Donald Michaelbaum, who is a fellow Canadian. So I'm going to ask his question, because I anticipate, based on time, this also may be one of the last questions that we have time for.
Yeah.
And he asked just a great question about, can you please describe in some detail how the school training program is conducted? Who conducts the program? What are the exercises that the students engage in? And how do teachers incorporate empathy into the curriculum? I think that this is maybe a long answer, because I think we're all sort of wanting to learn more about this.
Okay, sure. Thank you for the question, fellow Canadian. So let me say that Roots of Empathy comes to the classroom as a gift to the classroom teacher. We train an instructor. And the instructor very often is someone from the school who's not a teacher. I mean, they might have teacher training, but someone who doesn't have a classroom responsibility. It could be the guidance counselor, the social worker. It could be someone who is assisting with children with a disability. It could be someone who's a librarian, speech and language pathologist, any of all the helpers we have come to school. They usually love to get trained. And it's a very sustainable thing because then you have your own person. So the training is 4 days. And in terms of the training, we do train on temperament. We have a lot of role play with real babies and parents. We have a lot of the philosophy and the theory of change. We train for what the theory of change is very quickly. The theory of change is you coach children to observe the baby's intentions and the baby's feelings. Then the children are invited to share what they think. And you never correct them. There's a lot of projection in what they think. But in all of that, the children are developing the language for their feelings, because when you describe how you think that little baby is feeling, you are using words like confused, frustrated, surprised, mixed up, excited, all of these kinds of words that the instructor then has an opportunity to develop. They come from the child to develop. That reminds me of another word, such and such, which means what you're talking about. So the children develop this repertoire experientially, and experientially is the big word here. So the neuroscientists who've looked at roots of empathy say that the experience gets under the children's skin. And this is one of the advisors for the Harvard Developing Center spoke about. And this idea that it's cognitive empathy and it's affective empathy, because the children are emotionally engaged. Their learning is of a very deep. Michael Fullan, who's sort of the change guru in education in the world, says what happens around the green blanket, the children sit around a green blanket in the classroom, like you saw with baby May. And it is all about reflection and inspection and reporting. We say you are detectives. So they are learning to report back what they're seeing. We have a class the week before, which is a whole range of activities that help the children focus on the concepts we're working on. And we use a lot of children's literature. And around the world, we use literature, but it's always local literature, which leads to the same discussions, so that we have research from 3 continents, and it's all research in the same ideas. So the conversations we're having in the classroom are the same, although the literature which spawned it was different. So the focus on the pre-family visit is to predict and project. So we're here again, executive function skills, self-reg. We're helping children develop self-regulation, and they predict and project. And then the baby comes, and then we hear about what happened. And then we have reflection. So for all of the 9 themes, there are 3 classes. They're about a week apart. And then that reflective class is, well, let's think about what happened last time. And that's where we have huge moving from what happened on the green blanket, what happens with you. So when the children then share their own reflections and their experiences, and they're completely vulnerable in this, it allows them to connect one to the other. And this is a theory of change. You see it, you feel it, you get the vocabulary from the baby, you internalize it, and then you bridge to empathy. So that's how it works. And then, of course, empathic children are less aggressive, as our research shows, less violent. Society changes if we all live long enough. So in terms of your question, we have evaluation of every single child who has the program, 100% evaluation, every year, every child. We're talking 1 million children collectively. So that is separate and distinct from the research. So the reflections are from, or the surveys are from the children. They're from the classroom teacher. They're from the instructor. And they're from the parent. And we typically get more moms than dads. And that's because of gender inequality. That's because if you have 2 parents at home, and one is a mom and one is the dad, it's usually the mom can have the lower paying job and stay home, or it could be breastfeeding or a choice that the parent prefers to stay home. But you have to look at what are our policies for parental leave when you have a baby. What does our society want? You know, we tend to want, I don't know, more of proof that education is leading to good employment rather than good citizenship. So those evaluations, thank you SurveyMonkey, they all go back and we compile them along with some comments that people can choose to make, and we give it back to all of the communities that have the program. So tell me what piece I haven't responded to, because we still have another few minutes.
Mary, I have the regrettable task to take you to the finish line.
Okay.
Experience.
Yeah.
My apology to you and to everybody else, because I think I speak for myself, and I'm sure for our friends in UK and Canada, in the deep south here, the Florida from Homestead who are watching. When I say that, I think it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey that you're taking us, a humanizing, life-affirming experience for me. So now I want to take a moment also to let people know that you know, one of the issues that you mentioned, you talked about the relationship between trauma and affective and cognitive empathy. And so in keeping in line with that connection, our next course, our next presentation will be on March 19th by Charles Dinkin, Reverend Charles Dinkin, who would be speaking about a trauma-informed care community coalition model. Mr. Dinkins is a leader and an activist, a religious leader too, in the Liberty City, Brownsville area here of Miami. And so it'll be a fitting follow-up to your talk. I really, really want to extend my heart to you. Thank you for joining us. Also let people, the principals, the teachers, the parents who are in the audience know, Roots of Empathy and Mary are now in Miami with the Melissa Institute. So if you like what you heard and you would like your school to be part of our network, please reach out to us. We will be selecting a few schools to work with us on the training. But this is the beginning of what we thought, or what we conceive as a citywide effort to take it to every school in our region. So I'll leave it up to you, Mary, now, if you want to send some parting words. Thank you.
Thanks, Etione, and I'll be tuning in for that trauma-informed workshop. It's a very big interest of mine. So just to finish off on that last question, the school basically becomes a Roots of Empathy school, even though they may only have Roots of Empathy in one grade level. Typically, they commit that all children who will be in that grade level will get Roots of Empathy, so it's equitable. So we're so excited to be coming to you, Etione, and to partner with your amazing organization. And to all of the people who tuned in today, I just want to say that we live in an amazing time, and there's no playbook for this time. And I think empathy is the answer to almost every question we have. And we have a chance to put a scratch on the future if we all work together to make this a more caring, peaceful, and civil society. So thank you for coming.